So, our parents and their parents grew up in a very different world from the one we live in today. From a role-based society to where we are today, almost in a relational society. If you go back to the beginning of last century, an agrarian economy, and that means you got the raw ingredients and you made your own food out of it. How do we know that? We know that from the songs and the ballads of that day. So Billy comes home with a young lady, and the first thing his mom says in the chorus line is, "Can she bake a cherry pie, Billy boy, Billy boy? Can she bake a cherry pie, darling Billy?" Now, how many moms are going to say that today? Not a lot. Can you imagine the Wimble home? Levi comes home, and he says, "Jax, Mom, I found this lovely lady, this young girl. She's a born-again believer. She's a leader in the youth group." And Jackie looks at him and says, "But Levi, can she bake a cherry pie?" That is not going to happen. The world has changed. The world has moved on. So we've gone from agrarian economy to the 60s and 70s with really what really can be called shake and bake. Mix, cakes used to come in boxes. You shake it up, shake and bake, mix it, and off you go. And moms and dads had clear roles. Mom's role was at home. Dad's role was at work. And we progressed to today where we have a microwave society. And the roles are fairly mixed. And it is more about relationship than about role. So we come as products of this history of generations down to where we are today. And so we want to have a look at that. And what does it mean for us growing up? And what do we bring to our marriages as we do that? So I'm going to look at the early years, the teenage years, coming of age, leaving home, and getting married is the next part we're going to look at. After that, we're going to look a little bit about parents and ourselves in a marriage. How do we match each other? Then we're going to do our exercise for the night, which is a little bit about our past. And Denise is going to finish off looking at healing hurts. How do we heal some of the childhood stuff we brought from our families into our marriage? So that's a bit of the journey tonight. If I look back, my mom grew up in the period of the Second World War, and it was a period of shortage of resource. There wasn't a lot around. And so what they did is they developed a way of surviving. So when she walked through the house, she used to switch off all the lights, save money. Whenever they got a chocolate bar, they'd cut it into 3 pieces, 1 for each child, because resources were scarce. However, she was this big, and it really wrote into her brain. So when I arrived, I was taught to switch off all the lights as I walked through the house. I was taught that chocolate bars had to be divided in 3. And it's only when I got into my later life that I realized, when I had my own home, and I'd walk through the house, my mom would walk through and she'd switch the lights off. I'd walk behind her and switch them on. And I realized I picked up something in me. And I was determined to do my life differently to the way she, in fact, did her life. So it wasn't that her life was wrong. It wasn't that it was bad. It was just different. And maybe she didn't shift when she needed to. So, what happens in the early years? And I hope you guys can get that camera on here. So I do a lot of coaching work, and we use flip charts a lot. So I kind of love flip charty stuff, This is the early years. And if you look at the early years, have they got it there? Yes, they have. If you look at early years of our life, shall I turn that a bit more head on for you? Okay, cool. I'm going to crash if I do something different. Mom's and dad's role is really to protect, affirm, and provide for us. And so they look after our psychological needs and our emotional needs. And as they look after our emotional needs, they provide self-esteem. Now, self-esteem is really important. Self-esteem is important because as we go on in life, making relationships is quite a scary thing to do. There's a risk in reaching out. There's a risk in connecting to people. And so if we are, the more emotionally better our self-esteem is, the more emotionally together we are, the easier it is to do that. So mom and dad play that role in the early years of giving us that. Not only that, the circle around here represents the boundaries that they set, the physical. They start looking after us physically. So if we don't have accidents, get hurt, they provide boundaries of behavior as well. And they look after us through these years. They are providing the nurture, the support, and everything we need. One of my coaches this past week, in fact, was saying to me that his dad, when he was little, his dad was the silent, strong kind of guy. And his dad didn't speak much, but mom spoke a lot, and she controlled life through her voice. And so what happened to him is he looked like the two of them, silent when he needed to be, controlling when he needed to be. And needless to say, he needed help as a leader. He wasn't going too far with that kind of recipe. But the good thing was he realized it and knew it. Then we get to the teenage years. And you've all been teenagers. You all look so serious tonight, but all of you were teenagers at one time. And do you remember back to those years? So here the circle's a little bit elongated. It's not quite round anymore. This guy, and you can see he's got his arms folded. That's the picture I drew there. Teenage, like, okay, make contact with me. So these arms are folded. Mom and dad's job is to give him support. Help him form an identity. Help him stretch and grow away as well. And help him to start finding his or her own way in life. One of the challenges of this period is, your prefrontal cortex isn't well developed when you're a teenager. And so we do risky things, we do crazy things. And the problem for moms and dads is getting the boundary right and letting go while keeping us safe at the same time. I'm going to tell you a story which only Denise knows, not even my mom and dad know, and you're going to hear it for the first time, okay? So when I was a teenager, my good friend Colin got a Ford Escort, and it was a mustard-colored Ford Escort, brand new, out the box. And in those days, 45 years ago, you didn't have Netflix and DSTV and stuff. No, it wasn't any of that. You went to a movie theater, or you drove up and down the road on a Friday night, okay? Some of you remember. That's what you did. So Colin was a technical whiz. And Colin had access to technology. And the technology he had access to was police sirens. So we're driving down the road, and this guy comes streaming past us. Colin says, "Watch this, Gray." Switches a switch, and the police siren goes off. So we're shooting down the road, following this guy. A guy pulls off the road. We shoot past, keep going. Very funny. It was very funny. It really was. We did this a couple of times over a few weekends, and eventually somebody chased us. We never did it again. I can tell you, we never did it again. But when you're young and you're growing up, we stretch boundaries. And I think everybody in the room maybe has a story about boundaries that were stretched during this part of our lives. When we're trying to make decisions, we're starting out making decisions for ourselves. Then we have the coming of age. And you can see now we have a circle here by itself. So the young person is now charged with having to starting to make their own decisions. They have to make decisions about, what am I going to do in life? And am I going to do a gap year? What car am I going to buy? What will I do with my finances? Mom and dad are still providing some support. But now there's a bit of a line back where, because I'm by myself, I understand I need to start supporting others as well. Denise and I were quite impressed with our son Brad. When he left home, he came along and he grasped that, because he came with some gifts and presents which were really meaningful for us. And he said, "Thank you so much for this. for what you've done for me over the years. It was quite emotional for Denise and I when he left. But the last thing I want to talk about in this area is what Dr. Henry Cloud, my favorite psychologist, Christian psychologist, says, necessary endings. Sometimes there's a thing that has to end. So it's good, but to go to the next better place requires a necessary ending. And so the moms and dads' role is to help the child, the young adult, into a necessary ending. For some of you here tonight, maybe that ending didn't happen. Maybe mom and dad hung on, or maybe mom and dad cut too quickly. I don't know. All kinds of things happen. But it's a process, not an event, that happens over time. And then to the final, getting married. And you can see here now we've got two families. And each family has got its own way of doing things. Each family's got its own style. It's got its own things. And they send their children together, the children get married, and now you have a complete circle again. For Denise and I, we were talking about this, we both brought things like integrity, hard work, honesty, all those kind of things into the marriage. Those are the good things we brought. But guess what? We brought some stuff as well, which came from how we were brought up. Some of it was that the one family just did things differently to the other family. It wasn't wrong, wasn't right, it was just different, and we had to find our way. Going through the questionnaire this week, in fact, Denise and I found something interesting. In my family, where it said, do they hug you? Was there a lot of affection? And the answer is no, there wasn't, you know. My mom and dad were great, but they were about getting the task done and perfection. Denise, on the other hand, arrives in the marriage, so I'm about getting the task done and perfection. Denise arrives, and it's about romance. It's about affirmation. And so we are kind of like poles apart. My wife has been very patient with me in this journey, I can tell you. And I think I'm the equivalent of a romantic crawler at this stage. I sort of got to the crawling stage. But I'm sure after this course I'll be doing a lot better than that. So marriage, that's what we bring into this circle of these two families. There is mutual support, but understand, although there's mutual support, it's not, we are separate from each other. And the other key thing is that we don't isolate ourselves. There's still a link back there, but you are your own entity. Very important for us to understand and realize that. And so Genesis says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother, hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So that's God's expectation. It's God's design in what we do. So, now we're married. Where to from here with the family thing? The first issue is really staying in touch. How do we stay in touch with two sets of parents and keep the whole show going? Because I know I've heard some of your stories, and there's some challenges in fact in doing that. The first thing is for us to have a discussion as a couple. Discuss what we expect in terms of contact. How much contact do we think is reasonable? I know somebody who has contact with his mother multiple times a day. Now, is that wrong or is that right? I saw some raised eyebrows here. Is that wrong or is it right? It's not wrong or right. It's just as long as it's healthy. And as long as it's not during dinner, and wife's kind of expecting you to sit down or wash or cleaning the kids or whatever the case might be. So you need to agree. Make sure you agree when contact occurs. The second thing about staying in touch is that as you come together, you've got stages or seasons in life that you go through. And so when you're married, you want space from mom and dad. Then the kids come along, and so you maybe want them closer for babysitting. Hey, I don't know. I'm about to find out. In fact, we are finding out already. And then the kids leave home, they get older. And then mom and dad need to be looked after because they are frail, maybe not good with their finances anymore. And so for each of us, we need to just check in at what stage they are and how much contact they have. Again, a true story from family up in Joburg. So good friends of theirs get married, Brad's and Rachel's. They get married, and they've organized their honeymoon. She organized the honeymoon. And his parents arrive and say, actually, what we've done is we've booked you a cruise. Really, this really happened this year. We've booked you a cruise. So she's a bit put off, got a honeymoon, but the cruise is great, so they go on the cruise. They fly, they arrive. They get in their cabin, unpack, walk out of the cabin. Who do they walk into? That's right, his parents. Where are they? In the cabin next door. Cabin next door. So, hands up, who knows what she did? She walked off the ship. She really did walk off the ship. And well done to her, I think. You can imagine what this Christmas is going to be like. It's going to be frosty, for sure. Going to be a tad frosty there. So staying in touch, very, very important for us to make sure we do that. I just want to make sure I'm covering everything here. Okay. Next point is resist pressure to have things foisted on you. Many parents have great intentions. Some of us sitting here have got great intentions, but you get the gift, and it's just like you think, sure, what am I going to do with this, whatever it might be. Or mom and dad are just down the road, or because we have difficult economic circumstances, some of our mom and dads have to stay with us. And we need to be careful how we put boundaries in place. Boundaries, and so let me just address boundaries a little bit. We don't have time to talk boundaries tonight, but boundaries are so important. If you put boundaries in place right at the start, people raise an eyebrow, but that's okay, then they're used to it. If you wait 3 years or 4 years to put a boundary in place, that's a bit of a challenge. Because then it's, why have you waited so long? Do you not like us anymore? So boundaries need to be put in place early on. And you need to agree the boundaries with each other. Make sure you talk to each other about what boundaries are healthy. What makes a good marriage. The thing about boundaries as well is once you put good boundaries in place, people tend to respect you. Again, family up in Joburg, and her mom and dad, her granny and grandpa are really controlling people. And so Rach decided that she needed to just address that. And they sort of leveraged themselves on the whole family all their lives. Anyway, she drew a boundary. Boy, did she get a reaction. Incredibly negative reaction. However, and don't forget, these people were humored to keep the peace. But what happened is you have a kind of synthetic peace. It's not a real peace. Everybody knows you're kind of bending over to keep the peace. Rachel put the boundary down, and all of a sudden, the family's operating better. Everything is just working well. Kids, mom and dad, everything's functioning. And the two folks who've had the boundary laid around them are suddenly behaving respectfully. So I just want to encourage you, no matter where you are with the boundary thing, think about that and make sure we lay it down and lay it down well. But do it as a couple. We need to do that thing together. Leave parental control behind. When we get married, when you look at the ceremony, and we've got a ceremony coming up now, there are a couple of things which point to the fact that we need to leave the influence of moms and dads behind. So the first thing is, in some ceremonies, dad gives the bride's hand over to the groom. Okay? or you put a ring on the finger, or who gives this bride? And the dad and the mom say yes. And that's a clear sign of separation. And we need to make sure that there really is a clear separation that happens, and that there isn't in any way people coming back together to link up. Agree on your policy. Again, another friend, Ian and Gail, and years ago, they both had strong parents. And so Christmas came round. And Christmas is always a challenging time for us. So what Ian agreed, and he thought he had the recipe really figured, he said, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do Christmas lunch with my mom and dad. And then I'm going to do Christmas sort of evening-y thing with Gail's mom and dad. So he had this massive lunch, got to 2 o'clock, he had to leave. Mom and dad were very unhappy. Arrive at the next mom and dad, why are you so late? Very unhappy. Didn't work out. So try not do the compromise. I know like with Christmas, Denise and I alternated moms and dads, and that really worked for us. I think a lot of you here do it. Agree the rules with each other and between each other. How do we deal with moms and dads? Resolve any conflict. Resolving conflict, go back and use the conflict skills that you've acquired as you started off this course. If people don't want to listen, it's quite difficult when you're trying to draw boundaries and moms and dads don't want to listen. And what I say sometimes is just limit the contact. If you're going to have a whole afternoon and things don't go well, just limit it to a shorter time so that everything remains pleasant, but use conflict resolution skills. My mom, who is in this church, had a few words with my daughter, who also is in this church, by the way. And Natty was prepared to just walk away. She said, look, let's just leave it. It's not great. I'll not have contact. And I said to her, sweetheart, we need to go and talk about this. So I went and spoke to my mom. And, she was very gracious. She understood, and she said yes, and she has changed, and she shifted. So sometimes it's worth just grabbing the nettle and going along and making a change and making a shift. Exodus 20:12 says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. And I just really believe God has spoken to me so clearly about honoring moms and dads. And no matter how difficult the circumstances are, I just believe there's a spiritual principle here that needs to be applied. And if we do, we will be blessed in that particular place. So, looking at our past, this is the lead up to the exercise now. Isn't it amazing? We grew up in a home, and how many of you said, that's how mom and dad did it, I'm going to do it exactly the same? And how many of you said, that's how mom and dad did it, I'm going to do it totally differently? I really don't want to do it that way. That didn't work for me at all. I am going to do this thing far better. And you get into marriage and your wife says, sure, you're looking like your mom a bit there, huh? And you think, how did that happen? And it's because we carry a lot of stuff from our childhood. Remember, we spoke about the chart here. So when we're young, we tend to copy our moms and dads. And we carry that stuff into our marriage. And sometimes our unmet needs, we are unconsciously trying to get our spouses to try and help us with. So the next exercise that we're going to look at, go back there. Reflecting on your upbringing. So what I would like you to do is get hold of your pieces of paper and work through as a couple. I want you to work through as a couple this next exercise. It is a slightly longer exercise, so we're going to take about 20 minutes to do it. You're going to have about 20 minutes. Compare the two lists together and then answer the questions.
I'm going to be speaking on healing childhood pain. So as Graham has mentioned, we all come into our marriage relationships with ways of relating to others that are set in motion long before we actually meet each other. And the events in our childhood and the way our parents related to us imprint on us and give us a whole culture that we bring into our new relationship. No parents are perfect, and none of us had a perfect upbringing. The failure of our parents to show us unconditional love is likely to leave wounds and hurts, and sometimes actually very deep wounds. For some of us, we know for sure where we were wounded in our younger years, and we have clear memories of feeling neglected or overlooked or whatever it was. And we're very aware of how that impacts our marriage. Others of us may be a little more vague and perhaps rationalize some of the negative behavior that we experienced as children. And then for yet others, we may have large gaps in our childhood memories. Our minds may have been sealed to just protect us from the painful events that happened in our life. I know I have a friend, I'm 56 now, she's the same age as me, and only about 2 years ago did she start to have memories of abuse that she suffered as a child. For most of her adult life, she's been totally unaware of that. So that's, we are affected in different ways by our parents being less than perfect. So they do impact our lives. And the good news is that we can do something about it. We have a choice. We can either, sorry about you guys there, let's look at you too. We can remain victims, and we can say, I can't help it. I was brought up that way, my parents totally messed me up, and there's nothing much I can do. Or we can make a decision to go on a journey of healing with God's help. Kay Yurkovich wrote an article entitled How Childhood Experiences Impact Marriage Relationships. And she wisely encourages us to pick your pain. It's uncomfortable to grow and change, but it's also painful to remain stuck. So basically, we can make a decision if we want to grow or we want to stay where we are. In the context of marriage, the support of a loving spouse is so helpful. Understanding and not blaming your spouse is so valuable. If you can cultivate empathy and not view your spouse as the enemy, but as a fellow wounded person who at times responds out of pain, it just goes such a long way. And as a couple, you should be very open as well to outside help if necessary, maybe counseling or ministry of some sort. Healing does take time, but the rewards are so very worthwhile. In a few moments, I'm going to share some of my own journey of healing from childhood hurts and how it affected my marriage. But in the meantime, I'd just like to speak about the process that we can go through to heal these childhood hurts. The first one is to recognize unmet childhood needs. You've all just taken some time now to fill out that lovely questionnaire, and you've recognized some of them and reflected. Asked yourself questions about how your parents treated you. Don't be surprised if you encounter some strong feelings, maybe anger, disappointment. Those kind of things may surface as you recall some of the things that happened. Give God permission to open your heart. Tell him what you're feeling and be very honest with God. You know, the thing I love about God is he can take our honesty. He's up to it. So really be open with him about how you're feeling. And you may say to him, I feel so angry because of this, or I feel if only my dad had believed in me, or if only my mom hadn't ignored what was happening, or whatever. All of those things you can share with God and with each other. Right, then secondly, we need to grieve with each other. First, we've recognized where our unmet needs, what our unmet needs were, and then we can share it with each other and grieve. We've been hurt, and it matters. Even if it's perceived hurt, and it was maybe never intended to wound us. The hurt has impacted our lives and needs to be processed so that it can be dealt with. And it's good to just talk this through together and go through that grieving process and give each other emotional support. The next step in the process, in the journey of healing, is to forgive. And we spoke in depth about that last week. But just remember that forgiving is an act of the will. And so if we have family members that have hurt us, we need to start with making a decision to forgive them. And then after that, it's a journey of reinforcing that decision. In fact, just today as I was preparing for this, I took a little break and went onto Facebook, and I saw a picture of somebody that I've had to go on a bit of a journey of forgiveness for, and I had to remind myself, I saw a picture of them, I had to remind myself, you have forgiven them, remember, I had to reinforce it. It was a good practical example. And so that's the same with us. It's not a once-off thing and then we move on. Forgiveness is a journey. You need to give up any desire to repay your parents who wounded you, and also give up longings of what you wanted your parents to be for you. And then begin to enjoy the freedom. Enjoy the weight lifting off your shoulders as you walk in forgiveness. And then look to God and move on. Remind yourself that nothing is beyond God's power to heal and restore. Pray for yourself and for each other, and as you do, ask God to heal the sense of loss that you feel and to know His love. When you've been intentional about asking God that, put your radar out to hear from Him. You may hear from Him through circumstances. He may speak to you through nature, friends, family, strangers, songs, and of course, scripture. I just enjoyed, for those of you who come to our church, the other day we had a man by the name of Terran Williams who preached here. And he mentioned that being filled with the Holy Spirit was a lot like being picked up by God and hugged tightly by Him. And that was such a meaningful thing for me in my journey of understanding God's love. So lovely that a stranger could impact the journey that I'm on. I find also that songs are so encouraging to me, and in particular, you heard tonight how we do praise and worship in church, and there's one song that I love to sing. It's called The Lion and the Lamb, and the words that I really love is where it says, our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Just such an encouraging song to sing. Another one that goes, you split the sea so that I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me, and I can stand and sing, I am a child of God. Those are just two that have been particularly meaningful for me in my journey. So we need to believe God's unconditional love for us. That's easier said sometimes than truly believed in our hearts. But if we're intentional and we dwell on the fact that He really does love us, there are so many scriptures that affirm us. And I've got a lovely one tonight, which is from Jeremiah 31 verse 3, which says, I have loved you, O my people, with an everlasting love. With loving kindness, I have drawn you to me. You can take that scripture and put your name in there. I've just done it again in a different translation, which is a lovely way of expressing it. God told them, I've never quit loving you and never will. Expect love, love, and more love. Isn't that a wonderful scripture. Then I'm just going to finish off this section with my own childhood story. I had an older dad. He was 15 years older than my mom. He was a good man, a solid, clean living citizen, hardworking, but the strong, silent type. And in retrospect, I realized that my little girl heart yearned for more affirmation and affection. And I wanted to feel like I was a delight to my dad. This gap in my childhood contributed to my view of God. I grew up in a Christian home and I gave my heart to the Lord when I was a young girl, but I struggled to be sure of my position with God. And I'm so grateful to God for Graham, who would listen to me and counsel me in those patches where I was feeling dark, perturbed, and sometimes actually terrified. It was so comforting to have him support me. Eventually, he supported me in my decision to go for ministry, and through that, God revealed his love to me and exposed the lies that had been plaguing my life. It was also good for me to work through forgiving my dad, and something that, by the way, my children have had to do for me, because none of us are perfect parents, and I forgave him for being less than perfect. And what was lovely for me was that I started to notice fresh feelings of tenderness arise as I remembered my dad, and I was so grateful for that. And Graham is also grateful because he has a lot less counseling to do as I've gone on this journey. So, right, so now we're going to do another exercise, and I'm going to introduce that to you. You need to ask your husband or wife if there's one thing they're concerned about with regards to the impact of family at the moment. Then determine how you will support each other going forward.